Of being live, I feel like we're doing a job that matters.
You're live with Lucy Hockings on BBC World News.
With around 700 leaving in the past 24 hours. A new report puts the number of people displaced within their own countries at an all-time high. We're live in Oslo with the head of the Norwegian Refugee Council, which jointly compiled the Welcome to buy it.
I don't know who in the world to ask for help. We would like to be helped to sell this grain at any price, as long as the people don't go hungry. I think that all Western countries should help us. There's a feeling of despair. I'm talking now with tears in my eyes. It's hard to say.
Yuri's problems are faced by farmers across cities that used to be transported by sea. Ships aren't able to move because of the restrictions imposed by the war, and the sea has also been mined, which could take months to remove. Andrei Stavnitsa is the owner of one of the largest ports in Ukraine.
Get clearance from insurance companies, and these insurance companies are obviously not happy to allow this to happen because the sea is full of mines.
How long do you think it will be until you can reopen the port again?
We have no idea when we will be able to reopen the port. We are
at if the world wants to solve the crisis. While many in the West will feel that Russia is holding safe passage through the sea hostage, if no agreement is reached, Ukraine's crops could rot, while others starve. Caroline Davis, BBC News, Odessa.
As prisoners of war, Russia says more than 1,700 Ukrainian soldiers have surrendered this week at the besieged plant, 700 in the past 24 hours. Well, pictures released by the Russian Ministry of Defense appear to show them.
So these reports would take the total number who have surrendered and left the Azovstal steelworks to 1,730. About 80 of those, we understand, are severely wounded who were evacuated, but the rest have been taken to detention facilities in the Donetsk yet to give themselves up. The United Nations and the Red Cross, we understand, have been involved in monitoring their treatment, the situation, and the Red Cross say they are documenting the locations of these people, but what happens to them, whether they are given over in some sort of question, the answer to which we'll find out in the coming days, weeks, months even. Elsewhere in the conflict, we have reports of increased shelling in the Donbass. This is the eastern region where the Ukrainians are holding out or defending in trenches against Russian advances. And Kharkiv, the city in the north that they've recently repelled the Russians from. And finally, reports of Ukrainian shells destroying an alcohol factory inside Russian territory, killing one man, a van driver, and we are seeing increasingly
way back to the border with Russia. They say they have liberated all the villages in the region. But what happens after a place is freed by Russian occupiers? Our correspondent Olga Malchevska traveled to Sirkuni, one of the latest villages to be liberated. She said,
also home to a children's nursery. The village of Tsirkuni was occupied by Russians since the first day of the war.
The situation in the village is still tense. This place was last shelled.
Darling, what happened here was a horror. We were sitting in our cellars, waiting for the Ukrainian army to help. There were mines everywhere.
Volodymyr lives.
And that's it.
Volodymyr's neighbor Alla tells me that one day she suddenly saw a Russian tank parked right outside her home.
I went outside for a minute, and here they were, 4 men with guns.
And cautiously. Olga Malchevska, BBC News, Kharkiv.
Okay, let's just bring you up to date on the war crimes trial of a Russian soldier, the 21-year-old Russian tank killing in February and later surrendered to Ukrainian forces. Now, the 21-year-old Russian soldier Vadim Shishimarin, whose images you're seeing now on your screen, was confronted by the wife of the 62-year-old Ukrainian civilian who was shot dead in the... The soldier responds and says that he hadn't wanted to fire the fatal shots, but was threatened by another soldier. So that's the ongoing trial of Vadim Shishimarin, the Russian soldier, who has admitted to killing that state. You can find many of those details on our website, so do go to the usual place, bbc.com, to learn more about that trial. Now, British police say they finished investigating parties at the Prime Minister Boris Johnson's office, which broke
behind the closed doors of Downing Street and in the office buildings of Whitehall, the rules were being broken. While the rest of the country couldn't meet friends and family, people here gathered. Even in the number 10 garden, told to bring their own.
So, because of course those of us who set rules get additional scrutiny, that's always understood, and some of these parties should not have happened, and the Prime Minister acknowledged that. He's apologised for that. He paid the fixed penalty for the one event that he was at.
A team of 12 detectives worked through more than 300 documents and over 500 photos during an investigation that cost almost £500,000 and went to the heart of government.
I think it was very...
And leadership in Downing Street.
The Labour leader, on a visit to Leeds today, is keen to keep the pressure up. But despite saying he didn't break the rules, he's still facing an ongoing police investigation into his own actions.
Wages are down and the government is imposing tax on them at the same time.
What happened in these rooms, in breach of lockdown rules, has cast a long political shadow. Number 10 might hope they can put it behind them.
This is Impact on BBC World News. I'm Yalda Hakim. New figures show that the number of internally displaced people who flee conflict or disaster but stay inside their own countries had reached a record high of almost 60 million by the end.
Natural disasters driven by climate change. In sub-Saharan Africa, repeated droughts have caused crops to fail. People are on the move, searching for food. In Ethiopia alone, 5 million have been displaced because of the conflict in Tigray. There's some slight good news from the Middle East. In Syria and Iraq, there are fewer newly displaced, but millions fled violence. The record figure doesn't even include the 8 million people displaced inside Ukraine. 25 million of the world's displaced are children. Being forced to flee their homes is traumatic, and it can cause long...
Jointly compiled this report. Thank you very much, Jan, for joining us as always. I mean, 60 million people. We say these numbers, but these are individuals, their families, and 25 million of them are children.
Indeed, inside the country. And it's also harder very often for us humanitarians to reach them because of ongoing conflict, ongoing violence.
Yeah, and it seems to be getting worse year on year. I mean, we're talking about this being an...
Violence and from unlivable conditions due to the natural disasters there. So more has to be done to prevent the violence, to prevent this climate-induced
the conflict with the so-called Islamic State. They become internally displaced, and then it becomes incredibly difficult to get these people back home, even when the fighting eventually sort of stops or isn't at the scale that it was.
We have to rebuild security for people to return home. We have had the number now of internally displaced because of violence double from 26 million 10 years ago to 53 million today.
And these people is not able to reach them because the appetite isn't there?
Well, because there are too few donors, really. There are record investment in humanitarian work. I mean, this year, there are so many new billionaires. There are so many new rich countries that a child shouldn't starve in 2022, nor should we have women and children fleeing for their lives. We haven't seen that kind of an explosive displacement crisis in living memory. But it didn't get better in Afghanistan or Somalia or Syria or Colombia because it got...
And they're staggering, they're devastating. But is the world listening?
Yes and no. I find us having a more effective assistance than ever before. When I started donors, and then no protection when people need us the most.
Jan, always good to have you on the programme, and thank you so much as always for joining us. A couple from the English city of Gloucester have been revealed. That's almost $230 million US. The couple, who have 2 school-aged children, described the moment they realised they'd won as surreal. Have a listen.
And he was like, "I got a secret to tell you. I've got a secret to tell you."
Yeah. Right?
Yeah. He was like, "No, I really think we have." I was like, "Oh, Joe, let me have a look at it," thinking, you know, it's the morning, he had just...
Yeah. Didn't have my glasses on, he's got it wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I was trying to do it on my phone, but I couldn't get it to work or something. I was like...
Yeah.
And then I...
Very happy and lucky couple. We'll be back in about 30 minutes' time, so do stay with us here on BBC World News.
Hello. The searing pre-monsoon Friday will turn a touch cooler through into the weekend. Heading across Central Asia then, we've got a few showers moving in across parts of Kazakhstan, 26 Celsius for Nur Sultan, and a few downpours across Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan as well. Warm and dry for Pakistan, not quite as hot. And heavier rain further south into Myanmar. Here's the outlook then. Dhaka sees a few heavy showers over the next few days, turning a touch cooler for Islamabad by the time we get to Monday. Tashkent seeing a few heavy showers and some dusty conditions in Karachi, turning a touch cooler for New Delhi.
Oskar han har någonting som heter spinal muskelatrofi och det betyder att han är väldigt svag.
COVID pandemic and now the unfolding conflict in Ukraine have disrupted supply chains and exacerbated the rise in prices, leaving people on the edge of crisis. To find out more, join us for our Global Cost of Living series on BBC World News. Australia.
This is BBC World News. I'm Yalda Hakim. The headlines. The UN has warned the war in Ukraine could cause global food shortage. Have left the Azovstal steelworks in Mariupol since the start of the week. A new report puts the number of people displaced within their own countries at an all-time high of almost 60 million by the end of last year. It's being driven by climate change as well as conflict.
On BBC World News, the latest business news from across the globe. World Business Report.
Start with the soaring cost of living, especially for things like food and fuel. Stock markets in Asia and the United States have fallen pretty sharply over concerns that rising prices or inflation could prompt a sharp slowdown in the global economy, without causing too much damage to their own economies. Well, I spoke to Russ Mould, he's investment director at AJ Bell. I asked him why the sell-off is happening now.
I think it's because stock markets have sort of probably secretly been hoping that the US Federal Reserve policy, taking away the cheap money that supported the economy and got stock markets very excited over the last 8 or 10 years, and they're sticking to that policy because inflation is perhaps, in their view, an even bigger danger. What financial markets are waiting for now is, and they cannot affect supply. They can print money, they can't print oil or gas or crops, for example. So that's the problem they've got. They can cool demand or stoke demand. The moment right now, in many cases, is supply, partly because of sanctions. People have to spend on food and fuel. Economists like to say the best cure for high prices is high prices because they either choke off demand or stimulate supply. But people can't stop eating and they can't stop heating their homes. So that's spending in other areas like little luxuries, trips to the cinema, trips to the restaurant, if they can afford them in the first place. And those are the areas that you would expect to see trouble. And you're starting to see it now with the US retailers who've been blessed by 3 rounds of stimulus checks over the last 2 or 3 years.
What's happening right now? We can head to New York. Our North America business correspondent Michelle Fleury is standing by. Michelle, talk to me about what's happening right now on Wall Street. It was a terrible day yesterday, wasn't it?
It was. I mean, we saw some of the biggest drops to watch. It is approaching bear market territory when you see a 20% drop from a recent fall. As of the close yesterday, it was down 18%. So we'll have to see what today brings, but already starting in the red today.
Yeah, Michelle, we were hearing from Russ Moll just.
Cisco Systems, you know, known for making routers and sort of technical equipment, they've also been walloped, their share price suffering after they said revenue was coming in disappointing. Look, I think what is happening here is that people are concerned that inflation, as your guest was just saying, you start to see investors getting nervous and selling off and running for the exit. That is what's happening right now. What is behind that is this idea that if corporate profits really do get hit, if household budgets are getting squeezed, well, then the
New York for us. We're going to take you to India now because the transition to electric vehicles has been gathering speed in as a result in parts due to government subsidies. But a spate of scooter battery explosions like these now from New Delhi.
It's been 5 months since the battery of his electric scooter exploded, killing Manoj's parents and leaving him and his brothers with severe burns. In the stinging afternoon,
charging inside the room while leaving the scooter outside in the courtyard. In about half an hour, it exploded, killing his father on the spot while leaving his mum with 95% burns. In a week, she died in the hospital.
At various manufacturers, many of them start-up companies.
I don't think they've gone through a rigorous validation process. And, you know, a lot of startups probably don't have that culture or mentality of what.
Which in turn has an impact on the battery because of vibrations and all that. And the third is to design for ambient conditions, given the variability that we have in the country.
More than 15 million new two-wheelers get added to India's roads every year. Petrol more and more unaffordable. Nikhil Anamdar, BBC News, New Delhi.
We're going to stay in the region and just time to tell you that Sri Lanka has defaulted on its debt for the first time in the country's history. That's after a grace period. It's
Welcome to a world of comfort and service excellence with our new business class suites, where your privacy is paramount.
Instagram was this place where you posted your best self, the digital representation of you that you wanted to portray to your friends.
Now follower accounts have like a certain social currency. Maybe we weren't quite. A little bit older than them don't, is how intense the problems are, because teenagers are killing themselves because of Instagram.
This challenge of like making Instagram feel less pressurized, I think is very difficult, if not impossible.
there, I'm Ollie Foster. We're live at the BBC Sports Centre. Here's what's coming up for you on Sport Today. They've teed off in Tulsa. We're going to have the latest from the US PGA Championship. Tiger Woods has made a really good start. Steph Curry shows his class as the Warriors take the lead in their conference final series. First, still in the very early stages at the Southern Hills Country Club in Tulsa. There's the leaderboard. You can see there is a four-way tie for the lead at the moment. Look at that, Big John Daly rolling back the years, 2 under, along with YE to be a part of. Well, the PGA Tour has refused to release its players to take part in that tour, but the money on offer will make it a very attractive proposition. Dustin Johnson tees off a little bit later in Oklahoma. He thinks it could have a very positive impact. The internationals say that FIFA, football's world governing body, should set up a compensation fund of at least $440 million for migrant workers in Qatar after the human rights abuses that they've suffered, helping the Gulf state get ready to host the World Cup. Well, that Qatar World Cup organisers say they've been working tirelessly with international groups to help improve workers' conditions. Title race in Italy is going to be decided on the final day of the season. It's between the two Milan sides. AC, they've got the advantage. 2 dominance by Juventus. The league's president says Serie A can match any in Europe now for excitement.
It was a few years that we couldn't see a final race like that. So we feel a bit like the Premier League a bit, but we are very happy that we finally have one team, Rome, in a final of a European Cup, the Conference League. It's very difficult to compete with Premier League now because the figures are quite tough to... I think that it's something that we can do, but of course we need a bit of time.
There are 3 matches in the English Premier League on Thursday. Everton have been involved in a relegation scrap for the second half of the season. Defeat to Brentford to Premier League football next season.
It is what it is. We've got 2 games left to get probably 2 points with the goal difference situation with Leeds. And as I mentioned before, we're not going to write off a game against Arsenal. It's a game to go and contend and try and...
18th in the drop zone, but need just a draw at Aston Villa to jump above Leeds on goal difference going into the final weekend. Chelsea also playing on Thursday against Leicester. One other football story to bring you. The Gabon striker Pierre-Emerick called their best performance at a major tournament. A disappointing end to his international career, though, after pulling out of this year's Cup of Nations because of a heart problem. In the NBA, the Golden State Warriors have gone 1-up in the Western Conference Finals. They beat Dallas this season. Andrew Wiggins played a key role in Golden State's defense.
I thought Wiggs was fantastic. You know, Doncic is as difficult a cover as there is in this league, and we just asked Wiggs to, you know, to try.
I'm not such a good car, and you still need to fight and to make some progress. And this year we see that the driver is very important in Formula One, but not crucial. You know, and Luis is driving as good as he has been driving the last race until the last lap of the last race. And this year, I think, is looking into that way again. You know, with Max and Charles being very close and driving super well, and it's going to be interesting.
Finally, some cricket to miss. The T20 World Cup in Australia that starts in October. Just when England needed some good news for their cricket team, that isn't it. I'll point you towards the BBC Sport website for the latest on the US PGA Championship. But from
purity and quality, and leaving the rest to nature. Because when we live in harmony with nature, life can be great.
The mustard specialist since 1933. Barso se sarso.
Indulge in the luxurious, the most spacious, and supremely comfortable BMW 3 Series Grand Limousine. Welcome to the Grand Side.
Protect the future of our food. Join me, James Wong, for Follow the Food on BBC World News.
I'm very interested in the connection between people, and I love the fact that people see that in the book, that it's
painting for him. Sorry.
Fluid,
dynamic, androgynous, he's now at the forefront of a new generation of progressive choreographers who are drawing new audiences to contemporary dance.
It is just...
Talking Movies is sponsored by LIC. हर पल आपके साथ.
The Cannes Film Festival will be as close as is possible to normal. The arrival of Cannes in 2022 is seen as a pivotal moment in the film industry calendar.
Fabulous film festivals are wonderful places just to meet other artists and find out what they're thinking about.
As Cannes got underway, some cinephiles were looking for a selection of films at the festival has always displayed a commitment to serious cinema.
I think the important thing about Cannes and why it's lasted so long, 75 years, is that it's managed to balance the constraints of glamour and intelligent art house cinema.
This year, many still unseen have been drawing praise. They include Crimes of the Future, a lurid body horror film from David Cronenberg, to the murder mystery Decision to Leave from South Korean filmmaker Park Chan-wook. To many, what has made the cinema on offer at
is the one that will give prizes to films that maybe no one's heard of or will not be commercial.
But Hollywood does use Cannes to promote its wares, and one of the biggest studio attractions 75th anniversary, there are some disconcerting realities. The war in Ukraine has had a sobering impact. Russian film delegations have been banned, while Ukrainian directors with films at the festival are being welcomed, and finding interest in their work has been really high.
Increasing the risk of a global food shortage unless Russia releases grain stored in Ukrainian ports. More than 1,700 Ukrainian fighters have left the Azovstal steelworks in Mariupol since the start of the week, with around 700 leaving in the past 24 hours. Welcome to the programme. The United Nations has warned the war in Ukraine could cause global food shortages for tens of millions of people. The Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres, said the conflict could lead to pre-war levels. Our correspondent Caroline Davis reports from Odessa.
Ukraine's wheat helps to feed the world, but while most of its ports remain closed, much of it is beyond the world's reach. Over 3,000 tons of grain fill
Russian invasion and take out this grain.
How do you feel knowing that there are many people around the world that would be desperate for this crop?
There's a feeling of despair. I'm talking now with tears in my eyes.
It can be taken out by road, others by rail, but it's not in the same quantities that used to be transported by sea. Ships aren't able to move because of the restrictions imposed by the war, and the sea has also been mined, which could take months to remove.
Crews to come back, their shipping companies have to get clearance from insurance companies, and these insurance companies are obviously not happy to allow this to happen because the sea is full of mines.
How long do you think it will be until you can reopen the port again? Russia has said sanctions imposed on it would need to be looked at if the world wants to solve the crisis. While many in the West will feel that Russia is holding safe passage through the sea hostage, if no agreement is reached, Ukraine's crops could rot, while others...
Fighters leaving the plant, including around 80 wounded, began on Tuesday and is ongoing. With the latest, here's Joe Inwood in Lviv.
So these reports would take the total number who have surrendered and left the Azovstal steelworks to 1,700 to the Geneva Conventions. That is going to pose difficult questions for anyone who remains inside. I should say we don't really have confirmed numbers of this, but it has been said that the leaders of the Azov battalion are yet to give themselves up. The United holding out or defending in trenches against Russian advances. We've got reports of continued Ukrainian counter-offences around Kharkiv, the city in the north, that they've recently repelled the Russians from. And finally, reports of Ukrainians of the war finding itself onto Russian territory, something the people there were not really expecting and don't seem to be particularly comfortable with.
Now, a Russian soldier accused of a war crime has apologised in court to the widow of the man he's accused. Has accused Russia of atrocities and brutalities against civilians. New figures show that the number of internally displaced people who flee conflict or disaster but stay inside their own countries had reached a record high of almost 60 million. Figures are being driven by climate change as well as conflict. From Geneva, here's Imogen Folks.
60 million people displaced, forced from their homes because of war or natural disasters driven by climate change in sub-Saharan and are still unable to go home. And this record figure doesn't even include the 8 million people displaced inside Ukraine. 25 million of the world's displaced are children, being forced to flee health, well-being and access to education. The overall message from today's report: the world is failing to address the reasons people become displaced. It's failing to resolve conflict, failing to tackle climate.
With the mother alone, these are the most vulnerable of the vulnerable. They are the difference between the people displaced within their own country and the refugees who cross a border is very often that the internally displaced are even more vulnerable because there is less security inside the country. And it's also harder very often for us humanitarians to reach them because of ongoing conflict, ongoing violence.
Yeah, and it seems to be getting worse.
Climate-induced natural disasters, it is not impossible to defend the vulnerable in this time and age.
Yeah, and Jan, I mean, in the case of Afghanistan or Yemen or Syria even...
really are able to return in part because of insecurity, but also because the cities are not being rebuilt. In Syria, where there is less new displacement because of less new violence, of internally displaced because of violence, double from 26 million 10 years ago to 53 million today.
And when we look at these numbers going up, Jan, would it be fair to say that the appetite is not able to reach them because the appetite isn't there?
Well, because there are too few donors, really. There are record investment in humanitarian work. I mean, this year there is an increase. Shouldn't starve in 2022, nor should we have women and children fleeing for their lives with no protection.
And sadly, though, that's the reality that we're seeing. I mean, even in Ukraine, I mean, this report was done before.
A million or so refugees. We haven't seen that kind of an explosive displacement crisis in living memory. But it didn't get better in Afghanistan or Somalia or Syria. Less per person. We need an enormous investment, both in aid to these people, in protection for them, and in conflict resolution, and in disaster prevention. It's as difficult and as easy as that. Minorities beyond belief, as if it was in the middle of the Middle Ages. So there is this tremendous imbalance in technologically advanced assistance funded by some generous donors.
Nature, all-powerful and uncompromising, a force over which mankind has no control. But when one aligns with nature, she is warm, nurturing and loving. P-Mark mustard oil has always followed.
Metropolitan Police say they've now concluded their investigation into alleged violations of COVID restrictions by Boris Johnson and other government officials. The BBC understands there are no further fines for the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. Well, let's go straight to our political correspondent, Rob Watson,
and the standing of his government over the allegations around Partygate. This is probably the very best news he has had for a very long time, Yalda.
Yeah, but we still have seen a number of fines that have been issued, 126, I believe.
To be a very, very good result indeed. And I think they'll be hoping that this sort of begins putting Partygate and the allegations about lockdown violations to bed, Yalda.
And speaking of the opposition party in the
same view as the Metropolitan Police here have done in London, which is that they don't really want to be seen to be heaping fines on British politicians.
Yeah, so this is the Met Police, but that's not to say that the Sue Gray report...
Conventional wisdom, and that could often be wrong, but you sort of get a sense that the Conservative Party and maybe some parts of the country have just sort of moved on from it, and no matter how bad her report, what with the war in Ukraine and a sort of focus on a cost of living crisis,
had the ingredients to ramp up production of safe powdered baby milk. Well, Chamika House Osuya set up the Snack Sack, a mutual aid fund to help struggling families during the pandemic, and has now issued a call.
Bare. And you also have a lot of situations in which, you know, children might be in different households. We're talking about adoptive parents and, you know, other sorts of family structures where formula might be needed. And our list with the formulas that we need. If you're in that grocery store and you see it, buy it, and we will give you the information that is needed to ship it directly to that family. So this has just been a large network of even strangers held in February. And so that really halted production for a lot of baby formula, because I think they produce almost 50% of all the baby formula in the States. And then there's two others that don't produce as much. Immediately, I was really happy to see that President Biden invoked the Defense Production Act. And we're making sure that we get operations up and running again for families that need formula, but even measure to be there for families that need it. Again, formula is not a luxury. It is an essential form of nutrition for babies that need it. And we want to make sure we can bridge that gap for families that
of checks and balances in Russia, and the decision of one man to launch a wholly unjustified and brutal invasion of of Ukraine. Iraq. Anyway.
Team here on Impact. You can find me on Twitter. I'm at BBC Yalda Hakim, but I'll see you again next Monday for a full show of Impact. Go to our website to learn more of any of the stories we've covered here today. Goodbye for now.
The blue and green colours showing the most intense downpours for the likes of Kerala, Karnataka as well, mainly to the south of Mumbai. If we head our way further north, though, it's still very hot. New Delhi at around 45 Celsius on Friday. It will turn a touch cooler. Pakistan, 26 Celsius for Nur Sultan, and a few downpours across Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan as well. Warm and dry for Pakistan, not quite as hot as it has been. Could be some dustiness around Karachi. Then we're back into these heavy downpours down the west coast, turning a touch cooler for Islamabad by the time we get to Monday. Tashkent seeing a few heavy showers and some dusty conditions in Karachi, turning a touch cooler for New Delhi. Bye-bye.
वही स्वाद नया अंदाज अमूल चीज ये मेरा चीज है.
Nature, all powerful and uncompromising, a force over which methods, focusing only on purity and quality and leaving the rest to nature. Because when we live in harmony with nature, life can be great.
The mustard specialist since 1933. Barso se sarso.
Welcome to Indulge in the luxurious, the most spacious, and supremely comfortable BMW 3 Series Grand Limousine.
Welcome to the BBC World News America.
I'm Yalda Hakim, the headlines. The UN has warned the war in Ukraine could cause global food shortages for tens of millions of people. Secretary General Antonio Guterres said the conflict could lead to poor nations facing famine for years to come. The Red Cross are all your latest headlines here on BBC World News.
Now on BBC World News, Hard Talk asks tough questions in interviews with people.
Her organisation doing, and is the war in Ukraine taking the focus off other global hotspots, leaving millions of children in peril?
I would say that every war is a war on children, and we see that in Ukraine every day. As you said, 2/3 of the child population have to flee their homes. About 600 have been killed or injured. And they are invited to participate in different activities. And we had Hilda, a 12-year-old girl, drawing a picture of a Ukrainian woman dressed in a Ukrainian flag and being bombed. A 12-year-old that we support children and families moving out of Ukraine to make sure that they are safe. In Ukraine and the neighbouring countries, we are working with the authorities to make sure that their reception and their service is keeping them safe.
All right, and let me just tell you, and face a heightened risk of trafficking, abuse and other forms of exploitation. What are you doing?
So what we are doing is that we are working with different local organisations in Ukraine, and we have a big response of one organisation we work with. They met a very more or less platonic boy who was so traumatized, so he didn't speak, he didn't let anyone touch him, not even his parents. And of course, a child like that needs a lot.
In Ukraine, in Donetsk and Luhansk, have you heard about this?
So we haven't heard any reports like that, but of course we are really focusing on making sure that all violations on children's rights are being reported, and that we are as an organization
do to help collate the evidence. Is that something that you all do actively?
So one of the things that we and many other organizations do in conflict is that we are part of a structure where we are reporting on violations against civilians and in our case particularly children. And there are mechanisms within the UN system that we are part of because it is incredibly important that
elsewhere in the world. Catherine Russell, UNICEF Executive Director, said in May, we now estimate that by the end of 2021, 50 million children were suffering from wasting, the most life-threatening form of malnutrition. We expect this number.
And it has a lot of further implications on children's rights in other places.
But what do you do? We know that 13 million children in Yemen, for instance, are really suffering from a terrible food crisis. Sounding the alarm bell, saying this is a terrible situation. I mean, what are you doing to try and raise the alarm bell more yourself?
So we are an organisation with 100 years history, and we were started as a reaction to war and the suffering that are bearing the brunt of every conflict. As an organisation, we did respond to over 100 emergencies last year in over 50 countries. So this is part of who we are, what we do, and what peace can look like. Often when we respond to crisis, when we respond to humanitarian situations, we forget to listen to the people that are impacted. And for us as an organisation, we are really, really focused on making sure that children are at the center.
Under the new segregation rules and the dress codes and so on, and get to speak to the children under the restrictions of the Taliban?
So, as everyone else, of course, when the Taliban took over, we really a red line. We are not going to compromise with girls' rights. We are not going to operate unless our female staff can work in Afghanistan as they did before. And this is very much because we are a human rights organisation, a child rights organisation, particular focus on girls.
All right, so I mean, look, you have 28 member organisations worldwide with 25,000 staff across 116 countries. You enjoy consultative status as Save the Children with the UN, which allows you to
partnership in the countries. So UNICEF, the World Food Programme, are one of the core partners for us in many places in the world. Similarly, we are working in close collaboration with other big INGOs and local organisations. What can we do together?
But it takes a lot to get that coordination, and you've got to admit, you don't always get it right, do you? I mean, there's a lot of duplication, isn't there?
I wouldn't say that the problem today is that there's duplication. I think one of the problems is that we to make sure that what we do is done in collaboration, that we work together and do that in the humanitarian system. But I would say that most importantly is to make sure that we work with the local communities, the local organizations.
For instance, is $2 billion a year. You're on a salary of $250,000. And you have huge overheads at Save the Children. I mean, your staff costs alone are $350 million per annum. You spend 13% of your budget. All these NGOs, international Western-based NGOs, could go on helping the people that you say you want to help. Instead, you're spending lots of money on the overheads and on operational costs and so on, which could be, you know, under one big umbrella, really.
I must. Organisations need to make sure that we are really focused on cost, making sure that as much as possible of all the money that people so generously give us is allocated to programs and advocacy for children. And when possible that we partner.
Ali is a Kenyan-based executive director of Adeso in Nairobi. And it works in Kenya and Somalia. And they founded a network of organisations led by people from the Global South who are trying to reinvent. The nucleus is in Europe. Your headquarters are in London. You're Swedish, so you are also partly based in Sweden. 4 members of your 17 executive board are people.
But of course, we as everyone else need to look at, are we diverse enough? What can we do to...
But you're not, are you? Because I've just said 4 of your 17 board
members
but
that one,
are not white.
Yeah, but that one I need to challenge. In our board, we have 17 board members, that's correct. They come from are representing the communities where we serve. So we are on a journey towards more diversity and towards a more localized approach.
Okay, Degan Ali, whom you say you admire, makes the point, says about fundraising faces, and people like Degan Ali don't like these images of starving children used to raise money because they say it kind of portrays Africans as kind of passive spectators. Fair point?
I think we've gone through a big brand exercise where we are updating our brand, who we are and how we talk about ourselves. The new Save the Children is very much focused on children themselves, children's voices, making sure that we portrait them as...
When people portray us as victims, they don't want to ask about solutions because people don't ask victims for solutions. So I'm not saying this is specific about Save the Children, but it is, you are part of this big humanitarian Western-based NGO community.
The images that we are sharing, so this will change in Save the Children, because I do think that we need to portrait people and children as active agents in their own right.
Are you going to be moving your headquarters to Africa, Oxfam for
the world, and that we are focusing less on the UK, less on Europe?
Another criticism you get of aid, and this is bilateral aid, you know, from country to country, which of course dwarfs, you know, the humanitarian organisations, but it is part and parcel of the whole aid debate.
Structures that will help society and children become strong agents in themselves. Part of our strategy, regardless of where we work, is not just delivering programs, but it's also very much focused on advocacy and policy change. And
you accept then that the kind of work you do, the aid stuff, perhaps exaggerates the role of aid in the development process. So when
I don't agree with that way of describing it. With the crises that we have in many
and that violence against children is no longer tolerated, all that by 2030. Really, in 8 years' time?
That is our ambition, and that is our what we strongly focus on.
But is that really realistic?
I think we need to move forward.
Inge Ashing, CEO of Save the Children International, thank you very much indeed for coming on Hard Talk.
Thank you.
The actions of a few affect the lives of many. Join SHRM's global HR community to make monumental impact and cause the effect you wish to see in the workplace today.
Hello there. Still a critical fire day. For South America, the heaviest of the rain will be in the north of the continent. For Colombia, Venezuela, stretching towards Guyana as well. Cool air in place for Paraguay, Uruguay and northern parts of Argentina. Just 14 degrees for Buenos Aires. Heading across the other side of the Atlantic to Europe on Friday. Into Africa now, some heavy rain for parts of South Africa. You can see it here on the map for Friday. Further north, things are looking dry, but some brisk winds across parts of Egypt towards Chad, for instance, as well. So there could be some dusty conditions. And we've had sandstorms across much of the Middle East recently. For New Delhi. Much of Japan looking dry, but we could see some heavy downpours in the south. We've got this frontal system out here. And for much of southeast parts of Asia, temperatures are actually a little below average. For southeast China towards Vietnam and Laos, some heavy downpours. And some showers into northern New South Wales. And for New Zealand, it's cooler and more unsettled than it has been. Bye-bye.
This programme asks plain questions with the help of the unrivalled range of BBC journalists.
World News.
I understand the consequences of my decision. And one of the consequences of my decision was not going to Australia. And I was
experienced before. I bring that part of my Asian culture with me into everything I do.
They can kill us and they will also die. I can't understand for what.
When big names talk, they talk to them.
This is BBC World News. I'm Matthew Amreliwala. On today's Global, dramatic scenes at Ukraine's first war crimes trial. A Russian soldier
in their guns like that. Who knew what was in their heads? They could just shoot.
And I'm Lise Doucette in Kyiv with more on the impact of this war. The UN shares some shocking predictions about poverty if
Monkeypox are reported in Europe. What is it? How do you catch it? How serious is it? Our health correspondent is with us. And after 36 years, the wait is over for Top Gun fans, and Tom Cruise is lauded. Hello and welcome to BBC News. We start in Ukraine and the first war crimes trial. A 21-year-old Russian soldier has asked for forgiveness after pleading.
Yes, you join us in Ukraine's capital, and we'll start with that dire warning from the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. Another warning about the deepening impact of this war, now saying that if this war of Odessa, from our correspondent Caroline Davies.
Ukraine's wheat helps to feed the world, but while most of its ports remain closed, much of it is beyond the world's reach. Over 3,000 tons of grain fill Yuri's warehouse. Road, others by rail, but it's not in the same quantities that used to be transported by sea. Ships aren't able to move because of the restrictions imposed by the war, and the sea has also been mined, which could take months to remove. Andrei Stavnitsa, wheat, and without it, the UN has warned there could be a global food crisis.
It threatens to tip tens of millions of people over the edge into food insecurity, followed by malnutrition, mass hunger and famine, in a crisis that could last for years.
45%. What does that mean in real terms for the people of this country? We're joined by Manal Fobani, who is the acting representative for the United Nations Development Programme. And Manal, the UN has been looking at what is the state of this?
We're talking about 9 out of 10 Ukrainians falling into poverty if this war continues until the end of the year. This is a shocking number, especially that it comes from poverty rate by the end of the year.
From 2.5% to 90% within the same year, that must be an unprecedented collapse.
Absolutely. I don't think we've seen it elsewhere in that extent, and that speed and in that pace, on this crisis in Ukraine and on the war, that the government is able to lead, is able to address the people's needs, and is able to prioritize recovery planning and recovery actions and immediate interventions, not only emergency, and is working with the government hand in hand on the emergency response planning, on the humanitarian response plan. It sounds difficult to believe that we need to feed Ukrainians while Ukrainians feed the world. So it's essential that we help Ukrainians regain control of their sending food outside to the world. So it's an essential consideration that the government remains able to avail the services to sustain the economy. The government assesses actually their monthly coast partners in this country for the past 20 years. They will be lost by the end of the year.
Manal Fobani, I'm afraid we have to leave it there, but thank you very much for sharing these estimates, these really dire and very troubling estimates of what could be the extent of services. Olga Malkancheska has been to see one of the villages.
The road out of Kharkiv is littered with the debris of fierce battle. We are only allowed here in a military convoy.
1, 2, 3. Just a few people have stayed, and they're in hiding. Because at this time of day, we must listen. If we hear a whistling sound, it means a rocket is coming.
He survived the occupation in his basement, together with his neighbors.
This is where we all sleep. 15 people, 2 dogs and 3 cats. I couldn't step outside in my yard because the Russians were outside.
You cannot show fear. What could I do? I talked to them, and they went away. I didn't have any choice. I was at my home. They literally looked like children. They were probably just conscripts.
The military tells us starting to bring the city back to life, although slowly and cautiously. Olga Malchevska, BBC News, Kharkiv.
And Olga joins us now. Olga, you
intense and tragic. And just before our life, we saw also right there. I don't think you can see it from here, but maybe if you can see it on the pictures, there was smoke, and we could also hear the shelling from the side of those villages. Now in the center of the city, and I must tell you that today we woke up to the sound of blast, actually 2 blasts, and it was quite uncomfortable to hear, to be honest. And later on we found out that it was a shelling. It was around almost every 2 minutes.
Olga, we hope you and your team stay safe. Thank you very much for joining us from Kharkiv.
Thank you, Liz.
Well, let's take a look at the story that is dominating interest here in many other are preparing with their own investigators and also with many forensic experts and investigators from around the world. Ukraine fighting not just on the battlefield, but also in the courts. And as we have reported, borders, beyond Ukraine's borders, a war that President Putin said he launched because of the threat from NATO. And today in Washington, President Biden has been meeting the Swedish Prime Minister and the President of Finland, 2 countries, 2 NATO everything possible to get their membership approved by US lawmakers. Well, that's how it looks today here from Ukraine. But for now, I'll hand you back to Matthew in London.
Lisa Set there in Kyiv. So many strands that you've taken us through. Thank you through the course of our programme. Do stay with us, because also to come on today's Global, a standing ovation for Tom Cruise as he receives the Honorary Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival.
The comfortable BMW 3 Series Grand Limousine. Welcome to the grand side of thrill.
Hello, I'm Ross Atkins with Outside Source. This is the extraordinary story of climate change. Vaccines for Ukraine.
Portugal has 5 and Spain has identified 7. In the US, one man from Massachusetts has been admitted to hospital but is in a stable condition. So let's talk to our health correspondent. Catherine Da Costa is here in the studio with me. And Catherine, let's... just as you're describing it, we're seeing pictures of exactly that. I mean, I went through the number of cases in certain countries, but how common is it?
Well, as you say, there have been recent cases in Portugal, Spain, US, Canada and here in the UK. It's small clusters on contact with infected people or animals, so it's skin to skin basically contact, also coughs and sneezes, and also you could be from touching bedding or clothing, towels of an infected person. And most people will get better without the need for treatment. There is a smallpox vaccine which is about 85% effective against monkeypox. There are also antivirals. In the UK, these are being offered to close contacts if they're needed. Health experts...
Exactly on that last thought. I mean, I know all the caveats you're saying, but people will be concerned, won't they?
Yeah, they will, because we've come off the back of COVID and people are worried about infectious diseases and are we going to see another pandemic, etc. So I think people are on kind of heightened alert. So when you hear, and also...
But significant in itself that a call like that has been held. So I'll repeat that, because the chief of Russia's general staff having a phone conversation with his US counterpart. So if we hear more detail, obviously we'll return to that. Few minutes. We will devote a considerable time to that interview, because so much going on. If you were watching yesterday and those special reports from Afghanistan, so much going on with these new edicts coming from the Taliban. All of that here in a moment or two.
Showing the most intense downpours for the likes of Kerala, Karnataka as well, mainly to the south of Mumbai. If we head our way further north, though, it's still very hot. New Delhi at around 45 Celsius on Friday. It will turn a touch cooler through into the weekend. Heading across, and some thunderstorms possible close to Colombo. Meanwhile, it's looking pretty unsettled and showery for Bangladesh and for Assam as well, and heavier rain further south into Myanmar. Here's the outlook then. Dhaka sees a few heavy showers over the next few days, turning a touch.
Muya was a hell.
Behind every headline,
I had this feeling that I'm entering a prison.
there is a human story. This is our world.
I just seen the cops kill.
Having a global view really makes a difference, and shining a light on stories across the world gives our viewers another perspective. I love the pressure of being live, reflecting on the world in real time. I feel like we're doing a job that matters.
You're live with Lucy Hockings on BBC World News.
And what lies ahead. Hamdullah Mohib joins me live in the studio. Also in today's programme, from food to energy, G7 leaders meet to assess the economic impact of the war in Ukraine and how to handle it while keeping. News today that the Taliban has ordered female TV presenters to cover their faces. The latest decree after women were told a fortnight ago that they had to wear full face coverings in public. Well, if you were watching yesterday, you'll have seen our special reports on how the Taliban are turning back the clock. We saw patrols from the Ministry of Vice and Virtue enforcing strict new Islamic laws. We also saw these, the secret schools that have been set up with the ban on secondary education for girls still in place. All this with a desperate...
The report says it was a collective failure, and it's extremely sad to see that
everything that we worked very hard for, thousands of sacrifices made, and this is what it amounts to. I would say
responsibility.
I am as responsible as every other person there is in our government. We were all responsible, and I think it's going to weigh on us for the rest of our lives.
How surprised are you how quickly things they have turned the clock back so quickly on so many different issues? You and Ashraf Ghani left the country, that you abandoned Afghans to all of what we're seeing. I just want to play a clip from the former president, what he told the BBC about...
Terrified. He did not give me more than 2 minutes.
So there it is. You were terrified. You gave the president 2 minutes to decide. You saved yourselves, but you abandoned the Afghan people, didn't you?
Absolutely not. I think bad options, and this was the best, and it saved the president's life, it saved the country, the capital from an infrastructure being destroyed, and it saved the lives of the people that were left. Had the president was extracted from a situation.
That's the first time I've heard running characterized as heroic.
Well, fighting when there was no future for it, and it would have been catastrophic to put more people at danger when there was.
If we had run away when Jalalabad had fallen, Parwan had fallen, some district around Kabul had fallen, there was no agreement between us, could have been understandable. Maybe said, okay, maybe he was coward, he ran away.
Considerable, disastrous consequences, didn't it? Because you had Zalmay Khalilzad, the US envoy, saying that he was trying to negotiate with the Taliban not to enter Kabul, and that simply disintegrated the moment it was heard that you had left. Do you think that
was also not materializing on that last day? There was a plan for a negotiating team to go to Doha. I myself was negotiating that. But on the day when things unraveled at very fast pace, the best thing we could do was to ensure, because
you don't look at Ukraine and think to yourself, that is how you resist an oppressor.
Because Afghanistan did resist an oppressor. We fought the Soviet Union for 10 years. Zelensky has only been to give legitimacy to the Taliban. And that is not what Ghani was going to do.
Let me turn to that report I mentioned in the introduction, because you touched upon it, and the interim report, it does blame the US withdrawal, absolutely very clearly. But it also talks of President Ghani being his ability to actually resist the Taliban. Did you accept that conclusion, that assessment?
The president was not the leader of a political party. He did not have cronies to bring in that would replace others. I don't think there was, I think I read that report, and I know that the people who reported or read those report have their own concerns and have their own opinions, but that was not the fact. The fact was that there was only a small pool of people may think of scenarios that were available that were not taken, but that's not the case.
You don't think that's an insult to all of those people who you yourself earlier in this interview said had resisted for such a long time? You don't think it's an insult to say to them they were simply...
Afghanistan's conflict had been raging for so long. This report doesn't recommend or doesn't talk about, there were changes where many of the younger cadres were brought in who were trained by NATO, but they were younger. They were much younger, and sometimes had difficulty getting the respect of their fellow commanders.
Let me ask you another question, because you said in interviews before that you blame the Americans for simply pulling the rug. The Taliban were negotiating deals with local tribal leaders, which perhaps again explains why so many of those places fell without a fight. Why didn't you know these things?
Well, there are certainly some intelligence failures, but there was also government. Give us a fighting chance are the exact words I used in Washington to relay that if you delegitimize the Taliban, it will take away our fighting chance, because it will take away our legitimacy in our own country. And
ahead, he pushed it back to September. You knew all of these things were happening, and yet you still accused the Americans of pulling the rug and blaming it entirely on them.
No, look, I started by saying it's a collective failure. But what we were not expecting was the Americans to also pull some of the enablers. actually written or done quite a few interviews since the collapse. I've talked about some of the things that we were unable to do, and that was political cohesiveness. We couldn't create a single narrative against the Taliban. There was no cohesiveness.
I know you've been asked many times about this question of whether the helicopter was stuffed with millions of dollars when you actually left. Why do you think it's so difficult to convince many Afghans of that denial?
I have looked like the bad guy. I'm not saying he didn't have his mistakes. I didn't have my mistakes. We all did.
You've talked to the
Americans there is a real
about
issue.
The corruption that went on for decades, the billions that went missing. What did you tell the Americans?
I know of personal instances where people have bought passports for themselves and paying the Taliban off, and there are videos of them circulating in the media. There is a problem in the system that needs to be we warned against this before the collapse, and I am concerned about the rise of extremism and the rise of jihadi groups in Afghanistan. But the Taliban are also digging their own grave by
A final thought then. You've said twice in this interview, and I've heard you say it before, that there's plenty of blame to go around. Many Afghans inside of the country, outside of the country, would like to hear you simply apologise for your part that you played.
That anything that is related to my failures, I take full responsibility for and apologise for it. And I hope that everyone involved will be able to come forward and explain what the situation. We owe it to the Afghan people.
As fears of rising prices and slowing economies continue to spread.
BMW 3 Series Grand Limousine. Welcome to the grand side of thrill.
The Russian invasion of Ukraine continues, and so do the attacks on the south and east of the country.
Must let us catch up with the business news of the day. Plenty about. Ben is here. Hello.
Yeah, Matthew, that fear of a recession really spooking investors. Thanks very much. Yes, concern amongst the world's major economies and whether they are heading for recession, proving to be a big headache, big fear for
losses. It is desperately trying to avoid moving into bear territory. That is when a market is down 20% from its recent peak. Currently, as of the close yesterday, it was down 18%. So you can see only 2% more in terms of drops, and it would take you.
Yes, but we know, Michelle Dowie, the stock market is not the economy. The two are very linked, we know that, but just because investors are nervous doesn't necessarily mean the economy will tip into recession, but there is sort of a danger, isn't there?
What the world is going to look like maybe 3 months from now, 6 months from now, a year from now. And what is making them so nervous right now is this problem that you're seeing in many rich developed countries right now. The US obviously struggling with this, but we heard yesterday all prices, but it can also reduce demand, and that will have a knock-on effect on corporate profits, and that's kind of where the risk is seen on the financial, on the investor side. But on the day-to-day reality, you add to that the fact that consumers
of scooter battery explosions in the past few months have prompted concerns that safety is being compromised in the ambitious push towards electric bikes. Nikhil Inamdar reports now from New Delhi.
It's been 5 months and leaving him and his brothers with severe burns. In the stinging afternoon heat of the North Indian summer, the itch is particularly bad, he tells us. He can't go to work. His mum with 95% burns. In a week, she died in the hospital. Now, all that remains are the photographs and the memories. Across India, images like hundreds of electric bikes recalled by various manufacturers. Many of them start-up companies.
I don't think they've gone through a rigorous validation process, and a lot of startups probably don't.
Another problem, according to EV maker Ather Energy, is that battery packs imported into India are not optimally designed for local conditions.
You have to design for Indian road conditions, for the extreme pressure and the stress.
Authorities are investigating these incidents and say they will penalize manufacturers if they're found to be negligent. In the meantime, demand for e-scooters continues to soar as rising fuel prices make petrol
The festival, he was there to help launch his Top Gun sequel, Top Gun Maverick. And of course, the festival paid tribute to him for his 40-year career in Hollywood. They gave him a special Palme d'Or. So the sequel, it is finally hit.
Nature, all-powerful and uncompromising, a force over which mankind has no control. But when one aligns with nature, she is warm.
Hello there. Some big temperature swings across parts of North America. We've got very warm air pushing its way eastward, so things are really warming up towards New York, for instance, but cooler air working its way in from the northwest. We've had some storm systems pushing across the upper Midwest, but for Denver, for instance, we had temperatures of 30 Celsius on Thursday, but by Friday, just 6 Celsius with some snow flurries, turning even colder there by the time we get to Saturday. Hot air, meanwhile, getting squeezed close to the east coast. Across South America, some heavy downpours in the north forecast continuing through the course of the weekend, in fact strengthening a little bit on Saturday, so we could well see some further dusty conditions developing and temperatures of 44 Celsius in Riyadh. Across the north of India and Pakistan, still very hot, but not quite as hot as it has been into northern New South Wales, but it's going to be a drier day across both islands of New Zealand. Bye-bye.
This is BBC World News. I'm Matthew Emery-Waller. On today's Global, dramatic scenes at Ukraine's first war crimes trial. A Russian soldier asks a Ukrainian widow to forgive him for murdering her 62-year-old husband. Faces. As the Taliban turns back the clock, we speak to Afghanistan's former national security advisor about how the militant group took back control, what went wrong for the international community, and what lies ahead.
It was a collective failure.
62-year-old civilian. The soldier was confronted in court today by the man's widow. The other main development here on Ukraine is the UN warning that the war could cause global food shortages with tens of millions of people affected. I want to take you straight to the UN because
depend upon it. I now resume my function as President of the Council, and I would like to give the floor to Her Excellency Shirley Ayokor Bachway.
There from the UN, Antony Blinken there saying Vladimir Putin was using food and starvation as a weapon. He said the lives of millions of people depend on actually the right response from the international community. So we'll keep an eye on that session.
Deepening impact of this war, now saying that if this war grinds on, that many parts of the world will see famine for many years. Before Russia invaded Ukraine in late February, Ukraine was regarded as the southern port city of Odessa. From our correspondent Caroline Davies.
Ukraine's wheat helps to feed the world, but while most of its ports remain closed, much of it is beyond the world's reach. Over 3,000 tons of grain. Yuri's problems are faced by farmers across the country.
This crop is due to be harvested in just over a month's time, but the farmers here still have no idea where they're going to store it or how they're going to get it out of the country.
And for the crews to come back, their shipping companies have to get clearance from insurance companies, and these insurance companies are obviously not happy to allow this to happen because the sea is full of mines.
How long do you think it will be until you can reopen the port again?
Russia has said sanctions imposed on it would need to be looked at if the world wants to solve the crisis. While many in the West will feel that Russia is holding safe passage through the sea hostage, if no agreement is reached, Ukraine's crops could rot, while
development program. And Manal, the UN has been looking at what poverty could look like in Ukraine by the end of the year if this war grinds on. What is the state of this?
We're talking about started just on 23rd of February 2022.
Ukraine was enjoying some progression in its development, and basically because of this war, we're talking about 90% poverty rate by the end of the year. Has a lot on its burden on its shoulder to take on. However, they have been showing us a high level of resilience. We have been all impressed at the United Nations Development Programme and other UN agencies as well, working on this crisis in Ukraine and in so many areas around the country. We also need to take into account that this is a big country of close to 45 million people, and of them, 15 million are now between displacement and being refugees. So that's also a large number of people on the move.
Population being in poverty or near poverty, that means they will struggle even to find something to eat, so that this will mean a significant ramping up of the emergency aid to Ukraine. And is the UN preparing for that?
The UN is working with the government hand in hand. Cultivate and further harvest. There is no space and there is no storage capacity because we're not able, as the Ukrainians are not able to export, sending food outside to the world. So it's an essential consideration that the government cost at $5 billion to run the government services, to avail the social services to the Ukrainians, and you top it up with the humanitarian assistance and the development assistance. It's not only 9 out of 10 that might fall into poverty by the end of the year.
Extent of poverty here across Ukraine if this war drags on.
Well, that was Lise Doucette in Kyiv. I want to show you a couple of sets of pictures in terms of main developments, because this from the war crimes trial, the first war crimes trial in the day. Another significant thing to bring you was what has been happening in Washington with President Biden. He has been meeting the President of Finland and the Prime Minister of Sweden, both of those countries putting aside global, including the cost of living crisis. We're in one of Africa's most expensive countries to live in, as rising fuel and food prices are affecting all parts of Ghanaian society.
I want to talk to you about the politics of this. Did she not think she was going to get that question?
It's important to remember that this is a negotiation.
It's a good photo of.
I have an opportunity to create chaos.
Welcome back to today's programme here on BBC World News. Let's turn to Afghanistan and the news today that the Taliban has ordered female TV presenters to cover their faces as the economy continues to collapse. Well, this week too, we've seen the publication of the interim report by the US watchdog into what happened last August when the Taliban took over Afghanistan, concluding that the US and Afghan governments shared the blame. Well, Hamdullah.
It amounts to. I would say that it's not that we didn't predict or warned our international allies about. And I'm glad that the Taliban do not have the legitimacy, so that the world is still paying attention to us, with whom we had shared that this was exactly what we predicted is going to happen. The international community was extremely enchanted by the Taliban's changing narrative and assumed that.
From the former president, what he told the BBC about that actual day. Have a listen to this.
On the morning of that day, I had no inkling that by late afternoon I would be killed. And they were not capable of defending me. And Dr. Moeb was literally terrified. He did not give me more than 2 minutes.
So there it is. You were terrified. You gave the president 2 minutes.
And infrastructure being destroyed, and it saved the lives of the people that were left. Had the president was extracted from a situation.
That's the first time I've heard running characterized as heroic.
Well, fighting when there was.
If he had run away when Jalalabad had fallen, Parwan had fallen, some district around Kabul had fallen, there was no agreement between us. Could have been understandable. Maybe he said, okay, maybe he was coward, he ran away.
Khalilzad, the US envoy, saying that he was trying to negotiate with the Taliban not to enter Kabul, and that simply disintegrated the moment it was heard that you had left. Do you think that Ashraf Ghani could have been a Zelensky had he had more?
But on the day when things unraveled at very fast pace, the best thing we could do was to ensure that, one, we save our own city, we save the people that are in that city. Yes, it was disastrous. Many people had to flee. Many people had...
Services have increased sharply since the beginning of the pandemic. Some say the situation is becoming unbearable there. Rising fuel and food prices are affecting all parts of society, including one man's local rice catering business. Our West Africa...
I met up with him at the market, shopping for ingredients for one of his most popular dishes, jollof rice.
So how have the increase in prices affected you?
It's more. It used to be 20 cedis. But we are here today market and the woman is telling me the price is going to 40 cedis.
And you bought it for 20 cedis last week, 7 days ago.
Exactly.
And now it's double the price.
Exactly.
And has she explained?
And then the box.
Like
the box, yes.
Yeah.
Formerly it was around 1,200. But she's telling me today it was 2,500.
That means it's difficult for you to put together a budget.
Exactly.
It's markets like that. Have you found yourself having to stop buying because of the prices?
I used to buy oil in bulk, but now I'm even struggling to buy one.
What about the spices? Because I see you've got other things here. Due to the depreciation of the local currency against the US dollar. In the first quarter of this year, the cedi devalued by 19% compared to just under 10% in 2018.
It's more expensive.
The amount that we used to buy the fuel is too much for us. So we are giving to, the government to reduce the fuel for us so that it can help us.
Not only is he having to endure
food as a weapon. I just want to show you the live pictures, also a meeting and a press conference just started with the German Chancellor and the Prime Minister of the Netherlands, Mark Rutte. So we'll keep an eye on that. They're talking about Ukraine. So plenty more on that, our main story.
Next few days. And we've got plenty of really heavy pre-monsoonal rainfall reaching some southern and western parts of India too. So here's the outlook through Thursday night and on into Friday. You can see the blue and green colours showing the most intense downpours for the likes of Kerala. Can't be some dustiness around Karachi. Then we're back into these heavy downpours down the west coast towards Mali. Could be some heavy showers as well, and some thunderstorms possible close to Colombo. Meanwhile, it's looking pretty unsettled and showery for Bangladesh and for Accra. Sees a few heavy showers over the next few days, turning a touch cooler for Islamabad by the time we get to Monday. Tashkent seeing a few heavy showers and some dusty conditions in Karachi, turning a touch cooler for New Delhi. Bye-bye.
nature, all-powerful and uncompromising, a force over which mankind has no control. But when one aligns with nature, she is warm, nurturing and loving. P-Mark Mustard Oil.
Around the world, the soaring cost of living is impacting millions of lives daily. Climate change, the COVID pandemic, and now the unfolding conflict in Ukraine.
So what is it about facing up to a future without fossil fuels that is so politically toxic here? Join me, Shaima Khalil, on BBC World News.
With prices soaring, a shortage of workers and warnings of recession, world leaders are...
Here, a 21-year-old Russian soldier asked a Ukrainian widow to forgive him for shooting her unarmed 62-year-old husband who was on a bike at the time. It's the first war crimes trial in the war in Ukraine. The Taliban have ordered female regional cooperation and counter China. And more cases of monkeypox have been reported in the UK and across Europe, with several cases also identified across North America and Canada.
Jair Bolsonaro.
He's been called the Trump of the tropics, with views many see as racist and sexist. But Brazil's President Jair Bolsonaro came to power with support.
Acho que o problema do Brasil tem resolve com arma.
And these women could be the kingmakers.
Que elas são o voto que define essa eleição.
So I've come to Brazil to find out why. But it's evangelical Christians who are growing in number and political influence here. Nearly 70% of evangelicals like Pastor Raquel Prado voted for the current President Jair Bolsonaro. It helped give him the margin he needed to win. She invited me to come and see for myself how evangelicalism is growing in popularity in Brazil.
Mas dentro daquilo que se fala para o povo, no governo, para o povo, em fazer para o povo, no coletivo, ele foi o melhor até agora. Dentre as opções que eu tinha. Mas, para mim, de tudo o que ele fez, foi a verdade aqui no Brasil, não. O que falta para a mentalidade desse povo, que é negro, é parar de dar desculpa e acreditar que eles são capazes. E não ficar dando desculpa do racismo.
People in this country said that racism just wasn't an issue because so many people have mixed heritage. But in recent years, there's been a real shift. People recognizing that the legacy and the power structures left behind by slavery still exist. So when it comes...
Brasil acima de tudo, Deus acima de todos.
Bolsonaro might not seem like the obvious choice for black and brown women. With his well-documented catalogue of racist and...
quanto branco e vice-versa.
He also expressed nostalgia for the former military dictatorship.
Funciona. Eu sou favorável à tortura, tu sabe disso. E o povo é favorável a isso também. Eu digo para ele que não sou mais capitão, nem ele é general. Nós somos soldados.
Que você tem que usar saia jeans abaixo do joelho, que você não pode usar muita maquiagem para não ficar muito ousado ou vulgar. Prejudica demais muitos jovens, inclusive da minha idade, muitos amigos meus que congregavam na igreja como sendo realmente esquecidas por ser preto, por ser pobre, por não ter as mesmas oportunidades e tudo mais.
At first, Bolsonaro's religious messaging appealed to Tachi in 2018, but that changed.
O político fala e não vendo, pesquisando exatamente o que ele segue. E aí foi nesse momento que eu tive uma grande influência de uma professora, que ela me disse sobre o Bolsonaro por ser um homem machista e até mesmo sexista e misógino, e assim vai, a lista é enorme.
Evangelical Christianity runs deep in Tachi's family. Her mum was a
Amém.
Can you think of any politicians that embody Christian values?
Na minha concepção, no momento, o que mais se encaixa com o que eu acredito, com o que eu quero, é o...
Lidando o processo democrático brasileiro.
By 2018, though, Lula was caught up in the country's biggest ever corruption scandal, accused of taking bribes.
Eu não estou escondido, ele que eu não estou correndo.
Indulge in the luxurious, the most spacious, and supremely comfortable BMW 3 Series Grand Limousine. Welcome to the grand side of thrill.
Part of the same story.
Piece the story together with Ros Atkins, Outside Source on BBC World News.
Covered the previous 3 elections, and I'm not afraid to say that this one had the most aggressive campaigns. During the elections, the discussions were so heated that families were actually breaking apart over politics. And I'm not talking change or who were outside from the political establishment. And that's when Jair Bolsonaro appeared, promising to provide change and presenting himself as an outsider.
You know, people call him racist, people call him sexist.
For being someone who believes in God and listens to God's words was something very present in his political campaign.
So it obviously worked last time. Is it going to work this time around?
This time,
I never imagined something like this happening.
Publicly and posted it to Instagram.
E ele imitava, dizer contato comigo. Não querem conversar.
So are there more evangelicals that are now turning against Bolsonaro?
Eu encontro, sim, pessoas que não estão se manifestando politicamente. Só o movimento agora. Sigo. O meu perfil na sala com esse perfil, eles mudam de assunto.
Have not been proved it because of a technique they were court. So how do you go
todo o único cujo foca em se preocupar de fato
just really
só nas comunidades, corrupção, de tudo. Era aquela que estava o Brasil todo.
Sense of slaves calling them too late.
Eu acho que aí é mais esse jeito assim dele meio grosseiro, sabe, de tratar as coisas.
These are the voices who could decide who runs this country, and faith shapes their decisions. But religion alone isn't always enough to get their support.
Eu sou uma menina cristã, uma jovem.
Nature, all-powerful and uncompromising, a force over which mankind has no control. But when one aligns with nature, she is warm, nurturing, and
Grand Limousine. Welcome to the grand side of thrill.
खुश है ये आसमां ज़मीन हर तरफ छाए हैं हम ही ऐसी
working its way in from the northwest. We've had some storm systems pushing across the upper Midwest. But for Denver, for instance, with temperatures of 30 Celsius on Thursday, but by Friday, just 6 Celsius with some snow flurries, turning even colder there by the time we get to Saturday. Meanwhile, degrees close to the east coast. Across America, heavy downpours in the north for Colombia, Venezuela, stretching towards Suriname and northern parts of Brazil too. Still quite cool for the time of year through several portions of the continent. Now across Europe, and warm air still in place Saturday, not as hot in Karachi, some dust around there as well. Meanwhile, for the southeast of Asia, some heavy downpours across parts of Thailand, Myanmar, and also Laos, Vietnam, the south of China, relatively cool.
Having a global perspective creates a deeper understanding.